If you've been experiencing any kind of feelings of heaviness or say deep fatigue or even depression, then stay tuned. I'm going to dive into this topic, which is a very, very common occurrence during our awakening process. And so what we're talking about today is moving from depression to deep rest as we abide in the stillness of our true nature. And what I'm going to start with is somebody wrote in a question just a few days ago about this topic, and it's something that many of you can relate to. It's something that I went through and have had to deal with, but I want to reassure you that even if you're feeling a lot of heaviness or sadness or tiredness or even just bouts of depression, this is really typical, and it does pass if you remain committed to the process. So what I want to start with is this question where someone wrote in. He wrote, "Dear Dr. Grace, I've been feeling totally stuck in nigredo stage." I'll define that in a moment. With bouts of low-grade depression, zero motivation, and an exhaustion that won't quit. My old fix was diving into an oil painting or binging video games. But this time, neither one lifts the fog. What can I do to move through this and actually find some rest? Let's start with nigredo. Nigredo, if you're not familiar with this terminology, is an alchemical term. And from a Jungian perspective, the alchemical process is what we go through on the pathway of individuation. And individuation aligns with the awakening process. And nigredo is the first stage of individuation. It's a very challenging stage because we're dealing with the blackening. Nigredo means the blackening of the alchemical process. It's the dark night of the soul. It's the transformational part of when the ego is beginning to dissolve, and we're being called to confront the aspects of the shadow. So, of course, this is not an easy time, but it's a really necessary stage of the individuation process and a very necessary phase of awakening. It's not like we wake up from our separate selves or from identifying with the false self and then we're just abiding all of the time in peace and profound contentment. There are phases that we go through. And so if you're experiencing what he's talking about, where he says bouts of low-grade depression and zero motivation and an exhaustion that won't quit, this is very natural. I want to talk about depression for just a moment, about depression from a clinical perspective. If you've been diagnosed clinically with depression and you're not on the path of awakening, so you're not interested in truth with the capital T, you're not interested in experiencing your authentic self, then what I'm about to share isn't going to be of any help to you. What I'm talking about here are those of you who are looking, you're ready to wake up from the programmed, conditioned self, the false self, the ego structure. It's not working for you. You know that there's more and you're looking for reality with a capital R. That's being on the awakening path. And if you're experiencing feelings of low-grade depression or bouts of fatigue, then what I'm going to share could be really helpful. First of all, if you've had a depressive wiring, if you've experienced depression in your younger years or as an adult, then what happens is during the awakening process, that gets magnified. All of our conditioning, especially those deeper patterns, get amplified during the awakening process. And although this can feel really uncomfortable, it's really necessary because everything that you need to release and no longer identify with needs to come up into your awareness so you can see what's been blocking the recognition of your true nature, of your authentic self, right? And so if you've had depression that you've had to deal with in the past or while growing up, throughout adulthood, it's going to get amplified even more while you're awakening. And that doesn't sound like good news, but the good news is it won't last. I promise you that if you stay committed to your awakening process, then eventually these layers of depression that come up, or of fatigue, or he was saying zero motivation, it will pass. They come up in layers. They're coming up as patterns, and patterns are very, very sticky. One way to look at depression is that it's conditioned tension. It's conditioned tension that's seeking release. In fact, all of your patterns, all of the conditioning is actually conditioned tension seeking release. It's one of the reasons why we experience fatigue while we're waking up. Patterns are sticky. When I used to teach a program called the Self-Mastery Program eons ago, decades ago, I used to tell my students, patterns are like tar. They're really, really sticky. They didn't get laid down overnight, and they don't go away overnight. The deeper the pattern, which means the more that you've identified with a thought form, a feeling or a physical sensation, a behavior, a reaction, the more you have identified with the conditioning within the false self, then the stickier, the more tar-like that pattern is going to be. And so one of the reasons why we experience fatigue and depression while we're waking up is because those patterns take a lot of energy. And letting them go is going to require some rest, some deep rest. That's why I'm titling this particular video, From Depression to Deep Rest, because we need more rest than normal while we're going through the awakening. For many reasons, but one is this, is that the patterns are heavy and sticky and dense energy. And as you don't react to them, when they're inviting you to engage in them, and you don't react to them, that takes some energy. Emotionally, it takes energy. Physically, it takes energy, and even intellectually, it takes mental energy. So you're going to need more rest. So let's kind of break it down how this might play out. Say you have, like I did, I had a pattern of depression for a long, long time. My mother was a depressive, a clinically diagnosed depressive, and had a huge pain body, and I absorbed that as a very young child. And so I was very familiar at a young age with what depression felt like. Even though it wasn't necessarily mine, I felt hers. You know, if we're empaths, we're going to feel the pain, the suffering of those around us. And I definitely felt her pain. And so as an adult then, as a young adult, before I got onto the path of awakening, and even as I was on the path, spiritually progressive path, the familiar feelings of depression would come up. And you know what that feels like to you. You know what your patterns feel like. They feel very familiar. It's like, oh, here comes that depression again. Like I just feel down. I'm tired. Nothing sounds good. You know, what's the point of doing all of this? You know how that sound of depression, what it feels like. But say you're going through the awakening and that pattern of depression comes up. And then one of the other patterns that you might have is to try to manage the depression. And just pretend that one of the ways that you manage depression, I'm going to use my own example, what I went through with my patterns, is to get busy. What I would do is the depression would come up and I wouldn't want to succumb to it. And I would think, well, I'm feeling lousy. So what's going to make me feel better? What's going to make me feel better about myself? Give me a better sense of self-esteem, make me feel better about my life and just better about the world at large. And what that would take me to is busyness. I would do something that I felt was productive, that would give me a sense of accomplishment. Or I would do something that would help me get busy. I mean, even like cleaning or getting out and being active. I've always been physically active this lifetime. And so something like that, or engaging in a conversation with someone, something like that would be a pattern on top of a pattern. Depression being the deeper pattern, and then the pattern of busyness to escape from the depression. Can you relate to any of this? Even if you haven't dealt with depression, you know what it feels like to want to get busy and do something to distract yourself, right, from what you're feeling, what you're thinking. I mean, for you, it might be listening to a podcast or picking up a book or going shopping. I mean, again, you do know what your patterns are. By the time we reach a certain age, the patterns are familiar because they keep playing out over and over and over again. So if that's happening during your awakening process, if you don't engage in those patterns, depression comes up or fatigue comes up and you do nothing, or the temptation to get busy comes up and you do nothing, but you just sit here and wait for that urge to pass. Right then and there, the old conditioning will begin dissolving. This is actually how you can deepen your awakening and accelerate the dissolution of these old patterns, is by not giving into them. It's like not giving into a sugar craving, not giving into a craving for alcohol, not giving into a craving for smoking or eating or sex or any of that. We don't engage in it. We sit still and we don't distract ourselves. And we wait for the urge to dissipate. And that urge will dissipate. And sometimes it only takes a few minutes and other times it takes a while. But we sit. And when we're sitting and we're resting, then we're moving more and more into the silence, the formless, timeless silence, the stillness that we are. We are not form. We're not these bodies. You know, talking about this is actually giving me chills. Because it's truth. We're not the body. You're not your thoughts. You're not your feelings. You're not any of the physical sensations. You're none of that. You're having the experience of that. But as you sit and rest, as you move from depression to deep rest, resting the body, resting the mind when these patterns surface. If you give yourself permission for that deep rest, then the conditioning has nowhere to go but down. It will dissolve down into nothingness. And then another pattern down the road, the same pattern maybe will come up again, like another wave coming up from the ocean or from a big lake, but it won't last. And with each cresting wave of pattern, and you not reacting, and you moving into rest and stillness, they will dissolve. Those sticky patterns will dissolve. And you will need the rest, because ego patterns are driven by egoic energy. And when the ego wants to seek something, it's always seeking and pushing you to seek something outside of yourself. It's exhausting. But when it wants to do that, it gets energized. The body will literally get energized, thinking, oh, I'm going to just get busy. Now I'm going to go out. I'm going to go have a nice dinner. I'm going to go shopping. I'm going to go do something. Trying to seek something outside of us to fulfill ourselves. The ego has a lot of energy. So when you sit and you rest, there is a collapsing of energy that happens. I have mentioned this before. It's an actual collapsing. It is all the energy put into the false self collapsing. It's like you're pulling the plug. You're taking all of the wind out of its sails. And that in itself will make you tired. It will be a fatigue, but it's not a fatigue of depression. It's a fatigue of sobriety. It's like sobering up from the giddiness of the false self, the phoniness, the mask, the fake, the pretending we're something that we're not. It's the persona. The mask that we're wearing has a lot of energy behind it to keep it going. And when you don't engage in it, it collapses. So what I'm talking about is depression is likely to come up when you're saying no to an old pattern that you would normally engage in. Because even though the pattern kept the sense of false identity alive, it was still familiar. It was still something. The doing, the getting busy, the distracting yourself was still in its own way giving you a false sense of energy and fulfillment. It didn't last. It can't last because it's not our true nature. It's false. But momentarily, it will give you a boost in the short run. Just like drugs, just like alcohol, just like sex, just like sugar, just like food. It'll give you that momentary boost, and then, boom, you'll crash. And then you're off looking for another fulfillment. This is what's happening during the awakening, during the Negredo phase that this person wrote to me about. This blackening phase of the shadowy material and the conditioning that's become illuminated or has become highlighted for you to see it so you can let it go. It will bring up feelings of heaviness, of sadness, despair, maybe. You could have feelings that are even suicidal come up. If that persists, you need to get some help. Suicidal ideation comes up. It's kind of like, what's the point? This isn't any fun. I'd rather just keep the false self going because at least I knew that part and that felt more alive than this. But I'm asking you to be patient. And as you sit in the stillness, all of that heaviness dissolves. This is the liberation that you're seeking. This is where the freedom comes from. And going back, I want to circle back to what I was saying a few minutes ago. It's the stillness where you experience your authentic self. The more you rest in your true self, the more you abide as awareness, as you rest as awareness, the more you are living in truth with the capital T, the more you are in alignment with your true self. Your true self, the formless, timeless, infinite, unconditionally loving self that you are, isn't interested in movement. It's the ego structure that always wants to move. The mind's always moving. Maybe one of your patterns is a lot of thinking. If you are have a lot of air in your ego structure, and you are a Vata dosha type, and you need a lot of movement, then the thoughts can really start to take off, can't they? If you're that type, you know what I'm talking about. Just the mind runs with you, and you wake up and you can't sleep. That's movement. If you're more of a Pitta dosha, I'm talking from an Ayurvedic standpoint, body type, then that's movement physically. We like to move. I'm both Pitta and Vata, more Vata now. But if you're one of those body types, dosha types, you know what I'm talking about when it comes to physical or mental movement. Some of us are more emotional movers. We get all caught up in the narrative and a story about something that has a lot of feelings wrapped around it. We like the highs and the lows of all the feelings. That's all movement of the ego structure. That's not the formless stillness truth of your being. So this is what brings up depression during the awakening. This is what brings up fatigue during the awakening. You're breaking out of the conditioned patterns. And the other reason that I just briefly touched on, I want to just say it again. One of the reasons why you'll get tired and one of the reasons why you'll have bouts of depression is that it takes a lot of energy. It takes an incredible, tremendous amount of energy in continuing to identify with the false self, with your old identity. So again, when you say, oh, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not those thoughts, I'm not those feelings, I'm going to sit here and do nothing until this urge to have to do something passes. And when you do that, again, you're taking the wind out of the sails of the false self. So you will experience some fatigue. And so you will need, during this nigredo phase, some of the earlier stages of awakening, when we're confronted, and this can last years. So I'm not talking the first few weeks or months, and this can go on for years. But you will need more rest. Be gentle with yourself. Be kind to yourself. Please try not to judge what you're going through. Try not to judge the patterns that are coming up. Don't judge old behaviors that are going to be amplified for you to see, not to hurt you, not to make you feel bad about yourself, but just so they can come up and say, this is not who you are. This was programmed into your thinking. This is a conditioned response or behavior. So what I want to end with is just a practice to help you through this. When heaviness, sadness, depression arises, again, try to remember what I'm saying. First and foremost, there's nothing wrong. This is actually a positive sign that you are waking up, that you are waking up. So you want to sit down and you want to relax and you want to close your eyes, and you're just going to do a gentle body scan from the top of your head all the way down to your toes. You know, I like to bring the body into the awakening process because it's a big part of our awakening. Somatic practices are really helpful during the awakening. We do the body scan, we just kind of lean into the body and notice where there's any tightness. And it's usually going to be in the midline, often somewhere from up here to down to your abdomen, anywhere in between, shoulders, back, your chest, your stomach. You'll feel the tightness. And we just kind of lean into that and we breathe in wherever there's tightness. Say it's constriction in your chest, we just breathe into that and let it soften, because the body doesn't lie. The body will tell you exactly where you're holding on to tension from these patterns. So as you work with the body and you still the mind, these patterns begin to dissolve. And what you do is, when the urge to do something, as you're sitting there quietly, tuning into the body, is the urge to do something, to distract from the heaviness, the sadness, or the fatigue. As the urge to do something comes up, we just sit there and we hold the space to rest. You can lie down. In fact, that might be preferable. Or you can sit up, but you need to stop. If you're moving, you need to stop and sit or lie down and rest. And just wait until that urge subsides. And it will. It may only be a few minutes. It may be a minute. It may be a while. It might be a while. But this is the commitment. See, again, awakening isn't for the frail. It's for people who have the courage to really wake up and stay awake. It takes strength. So the commitment is we sit here and rest in the stillness. And then you're allowing your true nature to come into the foreground as the patterns move into the background and they begin to dissolve. And we become more and more comfortable with stillness. You're on your way home when you're practicing like this. And I mean home being your true nature. The more comfortable you become resting as the awareness, as the pure stillness that you are, the more you're living from your deepest truth. And so by trading the weight of depression for the grace of deep rest, we awaken into the timeless, loving, eternal nature that has always been our true home. Our true home. So stillness always arises as we allow ourselves, during the awakening process, deep, deep rest. Namaste.